Hi, thanks for being here. I'm Dr. Jessica Traylor, and we are going to talk about trauma-informed education. I have three of my former students here with me, and I'll let them introduce themselves in just a few minutes. But to set the stage, our PowerPoint is not forwarding. This is not a good way to start. All right, here we go. So just looking at a few aspects of what trauma-informed education really should look like. The foundation is safety, just making sure that everyone feels safe in the environment, not only physically safe, but also emotionally safe, and that they are welcome to share their ideas and bring their whole self to the environment. We also need to have some sort of understanding about trauma so that we can recognize the effects of trauma, understand that a lot of behavior we see in students, whether they be young students or college students, a lot of it comes from trauma and is not necessarily misbehavior, but a way to get a need met that maybe they don't have a better method of communicating. And then it really comes down to relationships. So if a teacher is able to spend the time with students to build those relationships, that's where some of that trust is going to come from. And students also need to see educators having positive relationships with each other, being able to support one another and have nice collegial, friendly conversations. Emotion regulation is another huge piece. And honestly, that could be really basic or can be very elaborate. It could be as simple as recognizing how you're feeling and taking a couple of deep breaths when you need to, or knowing when it's time for you to just walk away for a minute. Because a teacher who is dysregulated is not able to help a student regulate their emotions. So it comes back to the educators on that one as well. Another big piece of trauma-informed education is that individualized support. So understanding that every student is unique, no matter if they seem to have similar backgrounds, they're going to have their own individual situations. And it's helpful if we can get to know that and provide interventions that are what that student actually needs and not just some cookie cutter program, which goes back to relationships again. Coming from a strengths-based perspective really helps everyone understand that they are unique and that what they bring is important. Every student has something special, some kind of special interest, some kind of special talent, something that makes them a unique human being. And just being able to recognize and bring that into the classroom can really be very helpful for the students. Collaboration and coordination are key. No one can do this alone. It's got to start from the top down. You can be a trauma-informed teacher in a trauma-informed classroom, but if everything outside of your classroom is chaotic, that makes it much more difficult to keep things peaceful. And then that spills over to the rest of the community. So we need as much coordination as we can get to help this go well. And then professional development and support. Teachers need a lot of support to do this well. Because once you start building relationships with students and you start to get to know what's going on with them, we do sometimes experience secondary traumatic stress just from hearing all the stories and trying to be empathetic to everything that's going on. And so a lot of support is needed for the teachers, but then also that ongoing professional development, because as researchers learn more, that needs to be communicated to teachers in a way that's usable so that they can continue to develop those skills. So with that foundation under us, I'm going to turn it over to the students, and I will allow them to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about where they focus their research. Who would like to go first?
Oh, I can go first. I'm Akia. I am a Gordon alumni. Um, and my research focused on primarily a woman's based college, being that, women are a very particular group of people. I wanted to see how the college adjusted to them.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Keely Walker. For my research, I focused on K through 12 and the effects of trauma and how teachers can help regulate physical, psychological, and identity safe learning spaces for their students.
My name is Jessica Cole. I'm a human services major at Gordon, and my research focused on K through 12 and college, a little bit of both.
Thank you. And so could each of you just take a minute or two to give us some of the key highlights that you found in your research? What are the big things that stood out to you even now as you look back on it?
I would say for me, that trauma comes in all forms and there's no one way, despite our efforts, that we can help everyone, and that we just have to find ways to provide relief for people given the circumstances that they face in the communities that they're in, and just learning to be adaptive and learning to be flexible given any circumstances that come up.
One of the biggest things that I found is that teachers need more support, whether that be to understand how to give trauma informed care to their students or to take care of themselves in between taking care of their students.
One thing that I found was that the trauma is recognized. It's just it's a large body of people that it's kind of hard to adapt to everyone to where everyone's taken care of in a very specific way.
Mm. Those are all really good points. And so I kind of feel like what Akia said and what Keely said play off of each other a little bit, trying to find those individualized interventions that meet people where they are, but then recognizing the limits of that, because teachers and school buildings can only go so far in providing specialized care, which is where that extra support that Jessica mentioned is going to come in really handy. So thank y'all for that. As you were doing the research, were there any specific things that you found that were really successful? Like when you looked at these different schools, some things that they were doing that you were like, oh, wow, that seemed to really work for them?
For me, it was that I did Spelman College, and it was the fact that they had a lot of policies on specific things. Of course, not everything, but they did cover rape and different things like that, um, and how detailed they went into their policies.
Okay.
I One of the colleges that I looked at was Georgia Southern. And they have taken a lot of time to create quiet spaces for students, whether it's just a study or if they just need a break, and also implementing breathing techniques to teach their students how to get a hold of their emotions when they really need to.
For me, looking at K through 12, it was a lot of activity-based research and not specific for particular schools, but just different things like scribble wars, where kids can just scribble out all the tension and stress that they're feeling and learn to kind of channel their energies and stressful situations into more productive manners.
For some reason, when you said that, it reminded me of like back in the day, people would say, I'm so stressed, I'm going to take a smoke break. Like now it's like, I'm so stressed, I'm going to take a coloring break, which is actually very helpful. Akia, what were you going to say?
I wish that we could take color breaks for real.
Maybe we can. Maybe we can. So I'm curious about the policy piece. Akia, you mentioned that there were some pretty detailed policies. And not to call out a specific policy and, but just in general, what were some of the things that you thought it was important that they had policies about?
Well, I to be honest, I can't remember the specifics, but the policies about rape victims and how they handle them, and even how much counseling they provided, was really stood out to me because there's more than one resource, of course, and counseling was provided at least 5 days a week. Um,
That's
so
good.
that really stood out.
Yeah, that's really good. I know a lot of colleges have policies about emotional support animals or how to receive accommodations, and those are really important. They have some colleges have access to virtual counselors in addition to the in-person counselors on campus. So it's all different. It's unique depending on the resources that are available.
Oh yeah, and since COVID, online services and in person is available now, so it's very flexible to reach out.
That's good. And that also having those online services also gives you access to a wider variety of providers, for the different specialties, but also my son might want to go to a female counselor, but there may be things that he wants to talk about that he'd prefer to talk to a male counselor. Who knows? It's just good to have more options. Yeah. Okay. So as you were doing the research, what were some of the challenges that you saw that schools were struggling with when they tried to implement trauma-informed practices?
Financial challenges were the biggest ones because a lot of times training for staff is extremely expensive, and there are free resources, including nctsn.org, but anything beyond free training is expensive when you have an entire staff to train. But those free resources can be a good first step.
Yeah, the access to money for the training is a big deal. And having worked in K-12, they don't have that many teacher work days for training. And so they have to very strategically prioritize what gets trained. So if they're rolling out a new math curriculum, that's probably going to take all of their training days. So not only is it the money, but it's time too, is another resource. Yeah, what else did y'all find?
So teacher burnout was a big thing that I read about, and secondary traumatic stress. Obviously, especially in K through 12, when you see so many students a day, all of them are probably going to have something wrong, whether it's my juice pouch busted in my book bag or something more serious, but they're all going to have some kind of problem at some point. And just having to go through it and listen to every single kid, eventually it gets to be a lot. And even the teachers that are working towards bringing trauma-informed care into their own classroom without the backing of the school and the policy changes that would need to happen, even if they're trying to approach a situation with a kid that they see needs trauma-informed care, the discipline policy may not allow that.
Yeah, that's a big deal. Yeah. Because there's a difference between using like restorative justice practices and using punitive practices. Restorative justice is much more aligned with trauma-informed strategies. But not everyone uses that. Like you said, maybe the policy would say we're being too soft. So that's a good point to bring up.
One that I found was the foundation of most policies. Being that they can't accommodate everything, the foundation is kind of shaky, to where it doesn't give you an easy path to get things like trauma resolved.
So there may need to be more clarity with the policies.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. So policies and finances. And training, yeah. And the teacher burnout is a big deal. There's also something called compassion fatigue, which is similar to burnout, but it's when you just don't have any more compassion to give. I know personally I experienced this during COVID because I care, and my students were losing people. They were sick. They couldn't pay their bills because their jobs were shut down, and it's just hard to continually have compassion for situations that you have no control over. So yeah, those are all big challenges. So as we think about why would we want to do this whole trauma informed thing anyway, like isn't the purpose of a school just to educate kids on reading and math and writing? But we know that there is data, and it looks at improvement in academic scores, improvement in overall well-being, even improvement in discipline and behavior in a school setting when we have trauma-informed practices. But what were some of the things that you all were thinking about as the why? What would the impact on students be if we all became more trauma-informed?
My data aligned a lot with what you just said, because realistically, students who suffer from trauma aren't safe, or they don't feel safe, and they don't feel like they have the ability to learn or do anything beyond tackling what's in their heads or what's happening around them. So being trauma informed gives them the ability to feel empowered in their ability to learn, and gives them the ability to connect with people, both their peers and adults, in positive ways.
And that goes back to those relationships we talked about earlier.
My research aligned kind of the same way, but building a safe environment for students makes them more comfortable, which helps build a strong bond between students and teachers, which helps with their overall being as well as their academic performance.
Yeah. What would that look like? A safe environment, like in a classroom? Well, how would we know?
I would say active listening. I know that there are teachers that get frustrated, raise their voice, but that, especially for younger kids, that doesn't feel safe. Even when you're older, it's not safe. It triggers your fight or flight. So just a calm setting, really, where
It's one of those
everyone
things.
chill.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you walk into the space and you feel it. You either feel that it's a calm, welcoming space, or you don't, right? And that's your nervous system telling you this is not safe, by that fight or flight. Yeah. Akia, what are you thinking about as the impact on students?
I'm thinking that just having it's back to the foundation again. Just having like teachers in a good space helps them nurture the kids, and keep them grounded and help them focus more on what the task is. Being a kid and having a lot of trauma, is kind of hard to stay focused and not think about what's going on at home and actually learning. Um, so I think the positive impact from being trauma informed is I would say redecorating the foundation.
Okay, nice. Yeah, teachers are the foundation, and a lot of teachers go into it for a very personal reason. Maybe they had a great teacher that changed their life, or maybe they had a terrible teacher and they said they want to do better, for other people moving forward. And then just knowing that, oftentimes teachers don't have the resources to do what they want to do for their students does make it difficult. And teachers really are the foundation. They're the ones that have the most consistent contact with students. So, what do you think are the qualities or skills that an educator should possess, particularly to be a trauma-informed educator, to create that safe environment? And then are there any specific trainings that you think should be recommended?
So I feel like being trauma aware in general is an important like baseline. That way you can notice the signs in other people and even in yourself. And social and emotional competency was something that came up in a lot of my research. Making sure that you know what's going on around you, making sure that you know like how people are feeling in general, and knowing socially what's happening. Some students may be affected more by something that's happening than others.
That's a good point about the social awareness. I used to watch kids on the playground. As a school psychologist, I wanted to see their social interactions. And I would always notice, that kid that nobody played with. And I would ask the teacher, like, what's going on here? And sometimes it was nothing, but sometimes it was, that the other kids don't like him, and so being aware, you can intervene early. Sorry.
Definitely. Oh no, you're fine. But a quality that I came across was being open-minded. If you're not open-minded, then you won't even be receptive to even learning about it. So having an open mind does definitely get you on the right path.
Yeah, because it's different. It's different seeing a kid and saying, well, maybe this behavior is telling me that they need something, instead of saying, well, just go to timeout. Right? You have to start to think about it differently.
Definitely. Or punishing them because they're different instead of trying to figure out why they're different.
Yeah.
So some of the qualities that I found for your K through 12 teachers was being a good listener, and having a predictable schedule, something that the students can look forward to and not be anxious about what's to come and what might happen in class today. They have everything laid out before they get there, so it makes sense and it's not stressful. As for the recommendations for training, or just recommendations in general, I would say build a network, even if it's not within the school. Have a counselor that you can recommend, or the school counselor, or just people who can help given the circumstances and help provide what you can't.
That's a really good point. Yeah. So a lot of communities have what's called a family connection collaborative. And at least in the state of Georgia, it's an overarching network. It's exactly what you said, Keely. And so Lamar County has one, which is where Gordon is situated. And they keep a running list of resources available in the community for lots of things, food insecurity. Maybe you need help with your utility bills or some housing support. Counseling is definitely on there. So knowing where to find that information is very important, even for teachers, because you never know what your students are going to need. Yeah, and then as far as the training goes, Keely mentioned it earlier, NCTSN, National Child Traumatic Stress Network, has lots of free trainings. And then there's another group called PACES Connection, PACES. So it's Positive and Adverse Childhood Experiences Connection. And so they do a lot of trainings and workshops. A lot of them are free, and they highlight the effects of adverse childhood experiences, but also the protective factors that come with positive childhood experiences, like having an adult in your life who is not your parent, but takes an interest in you, like a coach or a teacher or something like that. So there are some resources out there. You just have to kind of search to find them. So earlier we mentioned the importance of collaboration, not only within the school, but with parents and the community. When you all were doing your research, how did you see the role of parents or families in general, the wider community, playing a role in that trauma-informed educational setting?
in my research, they were incredibly important, if not more important than the teachers, because children are school for maybe 8 hours a day. Then you go home and you have to deal with whatever trauma is at home or is brought back up when you're in the home setting and not at school. So having trauma-informed educators is great, but if it stops at the doors, it's not as helpful. So you need something beyond that, and training for parents and informing them about ACEs and things so they can look out for their kids before they send them out into the world and help them.
Mhm. Yeah, no, it's like we need a whole trauma-informed community, you know, even like rec coaches could benefit from some ACEs training, just real basic information. Yeah.
Definitely, I feel like everyone has a major role in supporting this trauma informed role, because it can be a stranger on the street that can really change someone's life just from, showing them that attention that is needed.
And you just never know, right? You never know what kind of day somebody's having. It might just be a smile, you know, you catch their eye, you smile, and that could change things. You don't know. Jessica, did you want to add? Yeah.
Um, the biggest thing that I found is mainly that ideally it would start in the home and continue at school. Um, but that getting parents on board is the biggest deal. Is if it has to start in the school and then continue at home, that's fine. But to get them on board.
Yeah. There's a lot of shame and guilt around talking about adverse childhood experiences. But if there's a way that it can be done without re-traumatizing or without increasing shame and guilt, that's the way to go. And the other thing is that not everyone who's had a bad experience ends up with trauma, right? So you can have a parent that's incarcerated or on drugs, or you can be abused and still not develop a trauma response if you have some of those other protective factors present in your life. And that may be the key to helping parents want to learn more about this, because they can be the biggest buffer for their child, you know, just watching them and knowing what's going on with them and helping them process strong emotions when potentially traumatizing things do happen, because life is life, right? Things will happen that we have to learn how to deal with.
For sure. And then I also wanted to add that if you're trauma informed yourself, then that could be, your first step in healing from that trauma. So the more you learn, the more you can heal yourself to help others.
Mm. I had a young man in one of my classes last year, and his group studied adverse childhood experiences. And when his team did their presentation, he brought his son to class, and his son was, oh gosh, he couldn't have been more than, 16 months, 18 months. He brought him to class, and part of his presentation was, I'm so glad I learned this information, because now I can protect him. Now I can make sure that these things don't harm him to the best of my ability, right? Because life is not foolproof. You can't put kids in bubbles. But that was powerful to hear him say, like, this will change the trajectory of my family for generations, just the knowledge. So yeah, he made me cry that day. I was like, oh, why you do it to me? But
I would have definitely cried.
they were happy tears. They were happy tears. But yeah, that was special. So where do y'all see this going in the future? This whole trauma-informed movement. What do you think is going to happen?
I'm sorry. I think it's going to be the key to everything. Honestly, the root of everything. Simply because how I would say Gen Z goes about everything. They're very particular on how they say things and what they talk about. And a lot of them are not kind of accepting the bare minimum when it comes to who they are and why they are the way they are.
Yeah, very open. Gen Z is very, very open about talking about life experiences and traumas and mental health issues, much more so than previous generations. And I'm wondering what these little ones, Gen Alpha, I'm wondering how they're going to be. Probably even more open, I would imagine. So that's how they're looking so far. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely agree with Gen Z. And I think COVID-19, post-COVID, has helped some adults see the problems that they've been facing over the years and kind of help draw some attention to it and help spread the need and the desire for mental health services and acquiring knowledge to help their kids and help themselves as well moving forward.
Yeah, COVID definitely brought out a lot of mental health concerns that people might have been avoiding, with other things that were stripped away when we were all locked in our houses for so long. Yeah, definitely.
One of the biggest things that I got for future directions is adding therapists to K through 12 schools. There have been trials done and it's gone amazingly. Academics look better, overall well-being, of course, is better. And it's something that takes a little bit more off of teachers because they may get that first little, hey, something's wrong, but then they don't feel like they have to take on the entire issue themselves.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of school counselors are not clinically trained. It's a different degree program. It's a different set of classes that you take. And so I wonder if along those lines, maybe some clinical certifications for school counselors, maybe an add-on, particularly in trauma-informed practices or anything, restorative justice and polyvagal theory, anything that would help with this. Yeah. And I'm also wondering how we're going to continue to leverage technology as we move forward, right? So we have telehealth and, maybe there could be, who knows, online support groups that students could join, or start to support each other. And I know a lot of more so Gen Z, but, folks are using social media as their social support network now. And honestly, sharing some good self-help strategies out there. So that's maybe a possible support in the future. All right, so what recommendations do y'all have for a teacher or a school that is interested in getting started with trauma-informed education? What do you think they should do? What are a couple of their first steps?
I would say learning and building that network and making sure you have the connections you need for specialties that you don't specialize in. And then just being open-minded. If you're not open-minded, none of this means anything. There's no point in us even talking if you're not open to hearing it. So definitely open-mindedness needs to be the first step.
Mm-hmm. And you're right. Once you start uncovering things, you need to know that you have resources to point people to.
For sure. And just piggybacking off of her open-mindedness, and I think the environment matters as well. Trying to change the environment to where it's comfortable enough to even bring up trauma, or what someone's been through. Because I know for me, the environment for anything is very, very important.
Yeah. So like I asked Jessica earlier, what would it be about the environment that would make it feel safe to open up?
For me personally, a judge-free environment. Because if I know that I'm being very vulnerable, but you're judging everything I'm saying without having that open mind, then I'm not going to say anything else to you, or even show you that I even have trauma. So I might want to fake it until I make it. So I'm not being who I am because you don't accept that.
Mm. Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be verbal, right? It can be a look that tells you that you're being judged.
That's the first indicator for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's a big deal. And some educators aren't aware of how their actions are impacting the other people around them for whatever reason. Maybe that's just a skill they haven't practiced, or maybe they're so focused on the content, delivering the content, that they're not thinking about those things. But that's a skill that can be taught. You can be taught to pay attention to the environment. Yeah, what else?
One of the things that I thought about was starting is a big step as far as implementing, but it's also one of the easier steps. Keeping it up is the hard part, and making sure that, it's all being implemented the way that it should be. And obviously, we're human, we make mistakes, um, but keeping it going long term is probably the hardest part about it, to make sure that even when you're frustrated, that you keep it together.
And the neat thing is that success breeds success, right? So the teacher who's doing well in her class with trauma-informed practices, there are fewer behavior issues, the scores are higher, and other people see that, and they want to know, how'd you do it? So that's one way to keep it going. Akia, were you going to add?
Oh, I was, but I kind of lost my train of thought.
Oh, it's okay. Maybe it'll come back. So as you all were doing this research, how did it change you? Like what personal insights did you have? What are you taking with you from this research?
So for me, what I'm taking from this research is to always look at someone as if they're in your shoes. Like if I approach someone in the grocery store, I'm automatically thinking about what kind of day they may be having. Because we all go through things and life just keeps lifing, so you just never know. So I, approach everyone with caution now.
Absolutely, right. Like there's an old saying that either you're going through it, you just came out of it, or you're about to go through it. So like you said, life just keeps life's going to be life. And the other piece I kind of get from what you said is it's not personal. When you check out of the grocery store and the cashier is rude to you, you don't know why. He he might have just lost his dog. You have no idea. But usually it's not about us. It's just that person may be having a rough time.
Absolutely. I would lean towards space being the main thing that I learned from this, both emotional and physical space. Sometimes you just need to be alone and be with your thoughts, and other times people in your space can be way too much to process when you're in your thoughts and also in the real world. So just offering people the space they need to get projects done, procrastinate if they feel like they need to procrastinate, or do what they need to do to get through the day, because days are hard and life is life and it sucks sometimes. And just getting through it, sometimes you need a little extra space.
That's true. One thing that makes me think of is like when a student emails to tell me they're going to miss class, or, whatever. I don't necessarily need to know why. I really, you know what I mean? Like, I really don't.
I agree. Like for work, in my perspective, like when someone calls off of work, I don't feel like we should ask them why, because sometimes that's just embarrassing and it's nothing, nobody's business at.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you broke your foot and you had to go to the doctor to get a cast, that's a legitimate reason, right? Like, well, maybe you're depressed and you've been in the bed and you can't stop crying. I don't feel like it's my business to know that unless a student just really wants to tell me. So that's the kind of space I think of when I think of myself and what I can give.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good thing for teachers to do, because a lot of times students feel awkward asking to miss things, and even if it is a good reason to be excused, it can be an apprehensive teacher that thinks, no, you should be here because my class is the most important thing that you need to do today, even if for that student it really isn't. Even if it is important in a way, it's not as important as that student's mental health moving forward.
Right. Yeah.
One of the takeaways that I had is that I know that I said this earlier too. It looks simple on paper when you really look at everything that's been laid out as far as, teachers need support, kids need support. The changes look simple on paper. And so when you're looking at it without thinking about all the extra steps that have to be taken, it gets to be a little frustrating because you're just thinking, why hasn't it been done already? But, you know,
But it's not as simple as it seems on the surface. Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you talk about competing priorities. If we're looking at reading scores and math scores, and some people still don't understand that social emotional learning and nervous system regulation are foundational to getting those academic skills, then you've got to backtrack, and now you're educating superintendents and principals on the science behind it. And sometimes that takes a while to shift that. Teachers just seem to get it, because they're in the space with the kids. They know that if the kid is anxious or angry, that they're not actually learning.
And being that they have to switch their hat a lot for them, that's when they really recognize.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, teachers have a hard job. So we've talked in general, we've talked about, how we can get started. We've talked about some of the obstacles. We talked about some of the key interventions and a little bit about some policy. How do you all see applying this to Gordon? What changes do we need? And what suggestions might you have for faculty and staff?
So one of the things for me is that Gordon's mental health resources are kind of hard to find. A few semesters ago, I actually, in my introduction discussion for my class, my professor asked what we needed, and my answer was therapy. Um, and I didn't know how to find it on Gordon's website. Uh, and all of a sudden, a school-wide email went out with therapy resources, and I don't think I should have had to do that.
No. So we need more messaging about what we can offer to students.
Yeah.
The therapy resources, but also accommodations. Students with disabilities have a right to accommodations, and a lot of students don't know that applies to them in college too. So yeah, just more, I think more clear messaging is definitely important.
I would say, back to the environment thing. I know you mentioned before that IC building has a lot of empty rooms, and having those rooms as like just quiet rooms to, just kind of get your thoughts together. You having a panic attack, just go sit in the room because it's available. And you don't have to reserve it or anything like that. It's just an open space and it's always there.
Mhm. I think that would be great. I went to a conference. Oh, it was somewhere in Florida. They had they called it a meditation room. They had a meditation room set aside for the conference attendees any point during the day. You could just go in there. They had coloring books, they had puzzles, they had something that did something with lights. I don't really know about that, but they had flavored water, and they had different teas, just there, just a little room. Yeah, and we do have some classrooms that don't get used, that could easily, and for not much money, be turned into just a relaxing space. Yeah. What else? What else do we need?
Um, I would say we need groups for students, going back to the campus as a whole and making groups easier. I don't think many people realize how easy it is to start a group that can help support each other, especially for students who don't actually go to campus, because a lot of students are online and is technically, I think, considered a commuter college. So there's a lot of kids that never go to campus, so they wouldn't even think about joining a group, let alone probably know how to. So making those resources available as well. And then for faculty and staff, just training and optimism.
Just optimism. I like that. I like the just
Just
in front of the
optimism.
optimism.
You gotta be optimistic, it'll get better.
I mean, our brains are some really amazing things, and they will find what we tell them to find. And so if we tell our brains it's going to get better, it will search for evidence that it's getting better. So there's a lot more to what you said than, it was a good suggestion. I like the social connection piece too, because we know that's one way to heal from trauma is within a social group. Like, we are social creatures. So isolation was a form of punishment, still is. So yeah, definitely finding ways to make those. And it is easy to start a group. It's very easy. But like Jessica said earlier, the hard part is keeping it going over time, maintaining it. So what about policies at Gordon? Can you all think of any policies that we have or need or?
Oh, I do for sure know some.
Okay.
I know that the kind of the readmit policies and just having, because depression is hard to get through, and to have to write an essay to just tell them what's going on is a lot. Instead of just kind of like having a conversation with someone, because I know for me it did take me a while, and it did take me a few readmits to get through, because I was going through a lot of traumatic things, and I have no idea how I pushed through, but I did, and that's the only reason why I was able to send in those letters and send all the required documents to be readmitted.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So when you're going through something difficult, any kind of unclear process can become a barrier that you just don't have the energy to overcome. You just don't. So maybe a more streamlined version of the readmit policy that doesn't require confession of your sins, which is sort of
That's
that.
definitely what it felt like.
Yeah.
Like I had to open up something that was very vulnerable that I didn't know how I was gonna be judged by, and just yeah.
Hmm. And then just the thought of having to write that could have been enough for a student to say, no, I'll just go somewhere else. Yeah. Any other thoughts about any policies or any
One of the things to me was I know that there's a general attendance policy, but attendance doesn't need to be a grade, for the same reason that the essay was hard. Realistically, if you're missing class anyway, it's going to affect your overall grade. So, why do you need a specific grade to tell you, you know, how many times you haven't been to class?
yeah. Yeah. And I think that goes back to the environment too. If you create a classroom environment that is welcoming and that offers students a return on the investment of their time, because your time is valuable, then we don't need as much of it's the carrot and stick mindset, right? Like, what are you enticing them with to get them to come to class? Well, I'm enticing them with good conversation in a space where they're welcome. That's all I've got.
Right, because like I know some classes I was supposed to be in because of attendance. Of course, I showed up, but I still was not engaged at all. I was there because I had to be there.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are consequences to that too, right? Yeah. And you were probably one of those well-behaved students who was just there and quiet. But sometimes when students are
Yep.
there because they have to be, they become a disruption or a distraction. Yeah. Okay,
I would extend, sorry,
no, go ahead.
on what Jessica said, and also don't need to explain your absences as well, because it's also extremely personal, and there's no reason I should have to explain to my teacher why something deeply personal is happening, and that's why I can't go to class. So just being more cautious of people experience things that they don't want to have to share in order to get out of class. So I think that should be added as well.
Yeah, the other key to that is some colleges are adopting an attendance policy that includes more excused absences, like a mental health day would be an excused absence under some of those policies. I still agree, though, I don't think it should be necessary to reveal the details of what's going on with you to get the okay to miss class. I think that's a little bit invasive.
Yeah, and I would say a lot of students that need to miss class for those reasons already feel bad enough about having to miss class. So then when you make them actually have to write it out and email a professor, it just makes it even harder. So overall, it's not great.
Mhm. And a lot of times the people who write these policies, they have good intentions, but when you write a policy without including the people who are most impacted by the policy, right? If those people aren't at the table having the conversation with you, you're going to have these unintended consequences. That's just how it goes. So maybe even more student input on college-wide policies could be a good thing.
Yeah, I do agree with that, because if I had, option back then to, create a policy to like freeze my academic, situation because I'm going through something, that would have been a policy that would have really helped me and not made me feel like, oh, I have to be reaccepted to finish getting my degree.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are some helpful policies. Like we have a hardship withdrawal policy that even after midterm, if you're having some sort of extenuating circumstances, you can still get a W instead of a WF or some other low grade. Like we do have some of these things, but back to what Jessica said about not knowing how to access counseling. A lot of these are things that students don't know unless they ask the right person the right questions. So it's just being more open about what we can offer and how those things can be supportive. Yeah. So this has been really good. I have a whole page of notes here. So I'm taking that with me. I'm so thankful to all three of you for taking the time to do this. I mean, it's summer. Akia already graduated. None of you are currently in my class. So there was no real reason for you to do this other than that you care about the topic and that you wanted to share what you learned to benefit others. And so I really, really appreciate that. It says a lot. It says a lot about you as individuals, and I'm grateful. So I want to thank you for that. And then just leaving anyone who watches with this last piece here about how when we do create these environments that all three of you have described, that feel safe, that feel welcoming, where you're not judged, where people listen to you, it does promote healing and it promotes resilience. And then that leads to this academic success that we want for everyone. So I'm glad we were able to share this time, and I hope a lot of people get a benefit from watching this. Do y'all have any last words?
Yes, I want to thank you for even putting this together, because sometimes a good host is always needed. We have the information, but you have the time. So
Oh,
thank you.
you're welcome. Thank you. Well, with that, I will stop the recording.